Okay, so today we're going to be talking about America's birth chart. And also we're going to be looking at Donald Trump's chart. And we're going to be looking at the transit starting in November 2016. And a lot of people look at this as really being the start of America's Pluto return.
It's pretty undeniable that the landscape of America has changed since the beginning of the election, where Trump's campaign against Hillary Clinton, and then his election and his administration. There was certainly tension prior to that. Even since 9/11 and the Bush administration, there's been turmoil has been increasing, and it certainly has gone up a few notches since the Trump administration. And so whatever side you're on, it's obvious that it really doesn't matter, that it's undeniable that there's this unrest. And so in America's birth chart, you have the sun here, 13 degrees of Cancer in a tight square to Saturn. If you allow 15-degree orb with the sun for conjunctions and oppositions, which I typically do, I find them to hold up. You could then also say America's sun is opposite Pluto over here. It looks like 14 degrees. The transits that were going on, very interesting in America's birth chart. There was a lot of activity. So you have Jupiter over here in the middle of Libra, making a conjunction to Saturn, square to America's sun. You have Pluto in the middle of Capricorn, opposite America's sun. And then beginning, you could say, within 15 degrees of approaching where it was in America's birth chart. And then you have Uranus over here, I think at 20 degrees. So it's widely square still to America's sun and Mercury, and I would say actually close to exactly square their midpoint. And then widely opposite America's Saturn and transiting Jupiter. And then also widely square transiting Pluto. So you have a transiting T-square lining up with the T-square in America's chart, though it's not indicated because there's no red line from America's sun to Pluto. You could say that's a wide T-square. In addition to that, you have Saturn is going over America's ascendant, opposite Mars and Uranus. So that's a lot going on there. You could even include Neptune here. Let's see. Looks like Neptune is 9 degrees. So Neptune is also widely trine to Jupiter and the sun, and square to transiting Saturn, perhaps also widely trine to the sun. So you could say the sun and Neptune are also forming a trine that lines up to America's sun. And it's interesting, you can kind of see how, well, certainly the energies of Uranus, Jupiter, and Pluto play into this dynamic. Pluto being kind of that energy of intensity, and the Uranus-Pluto combination. So Uranus and Pluto were conjunct during the 60s. So that's really probably the best example of how those two energies blend. It's kind of creates this revolutionary quality to it. They're in a square at this point. The quality of that energy is going to be in some way, the squares is going to create challenge. It's going to create dissonance. And so that Pluto-Uranus square, there's this quality of rebellion, which in this case is showing up more as like polarization, like the two sides kind of fighting against each other. And then you throw Jupiter into the mix there. Jupiter has this quality of like philosophical, like that quality of being philosophical, which also keep in mind in America's birth chart, Jupiter. So America's birth chart has a Sagittarius rising, which makes Jupiter its chart ruler. Jupiter is also conjunct America's sun. So Jupiter is a very energized planet for America. It might be interesting to just kind of go through all the Jupiter transits in America and see what was going on then. you throw Jupiter in the mix there, and it's almost like Jupiter has this quality of like philosophical superiority sometimes when it's in a dysfunctional expression. Traditional astrology kind of makes Jupiter out to be like all wonderful. I find that Jupiter has as much of a dark side as any other planet. And so when Jupiter is being expressed in a way that's dysfunctional, I find that it shows up as like preachiness and philosophical superiority. Like I'm right and you're wrong.
And I also think, when we think of Jupiter, it is like when you said it's not, people think of it as a good thing. And I think it's thought of as expansion, but like expansion of a philosophical idea that could be a really good thing. That whole concept of expansion could go either way. So like, I think that goes back to what you're saying about Jupiter not being good or bad.
Yeah, it could be
depends
toxic.
on what it's expanding.
I mean, you think about like the whole like history of Christianity with like the Crusades and the colonizers of America, like just destroying and murdering countless people in the name of their philosophy, their belief system. So you could really say Jupiter could correspond to just belief systems in general. And so you're also seeing this polarization and conflict between two belief systems. And then you could even throw Neptune into the mix there. And Neptune kind of has this element of like kind of cloudiness and confusion.
And that's really that feeling that I think, that day after the election in 2016, when Donald Trump won over Hillary Clinton, I think, living in America, we'd really come to believe that like all the polling and the polls showed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And I think we think with all this technology that so much is kind of written in stone before it happens. And I think the polling was so way off. I mean, all the polls had her winning. And I think that there was this feeling of, if you were for Donald Trump or not, I still think that there was this feeling of surprise when he won, because it did feel kind of unexpected.
Yeah. And also the belief that there was fraud, and that there's cheating, all this stuff with Russians and manipulating all that. Interestingly, Mars was also kind of in the mix here, conjunct America's Pluto. And you could think of Mars kind of having that energy of anger, And so not only is it conjunct America's Pluto, but it's opposite America's Mercury. So that energy was also present. And then Saturn going over the ascendant, which then would also be opposite Mars and Uranus. This quality of like authority and like following the rules, but perhaps there's also this like questioning, not believing that things were right. So I think Saturn, let me see. Yeah, so Saturn and Mars were also exactly semi-square, which makes a hard aspect.
And I think in that time too, I mean, one thing that really came out of the 2016 election is this idea of kind of the destruction of the two-party system. I mean, even when you think about Bernie Sanders being in the mix with the Democratic Party, and, it was like there was that's when we really saw the split between the party, and, a lot of Republicans maybe didn't support Trump, and he was almost seen as a third party. But I think, to me, when I think of, the Pluto return, it is this destruction of these systems that we've had in place. And I think that was really the beginning of that, the destruction of this two-party system that we're still seeing going forward into the 2024 election.
Yeah, well, it still exists as of now. It seems like it very well could be on its way out. That it's overdue for some sort of a change. And I'm not going to predict how it's going to change, though I'd be surprised if it's not very different by, 10 years from now, if not sooner, hopefully sooner. Yeah, those are all the transits going on during the election, which is pretty significant. anytime in an individual's birth chart, whether that be a person or a country or a business or anything, if there is a square, particularly if that square involves the individual's sun or moon, and if there's two squares or a T-square, like in this case, I'm calling Pluto part of a T-square, kind of, with America. When you have a transiting T-square that lines up with that would be one of the rare cases as an astrologer when I would make a prediction that something dramatic is going to happen. And I personally don't ever make specific predictions, though. If I was doing a reading with somebody, I would look at their chart and say, okay, that's coming. I would expect your life is going to be different after this. And I would then offer suggestions about how to work with that energy for the individual so that they can prepare and perhaps move with it gracefully and have some sort of positive change. But for most people, they don't get an astrology reading and get the opportunity to prepare. And so something unpleasant happens and you're forced to deal with it. And in the aftermath, things change, hopefully. And if they don't, then that's probably going to be the beginning of a really tough period of the person's life. And in America, these transits have moved on. I mean, now Pluto is conjunct natal Pluto and still widely opposite Mercury in America's chart. But all these other transits have moved on, and we're still seeing the energy of what we saw in that period. I mean, I think next, we can also kind of look at Donald Trump's chart, and then also where the planets are going to be in, I guess it would be next year, 2024 is when the campaign will be. And then I expect there to be fireworks regardless of what happens, whether he's elected or he loses, because the one side or the other is going to be really upset, when their candidate loses.
And I think that's the other thing that happened in American politics is I don't think we've ever seen elections this close. And that's really what everybody's talking about, that there is this real division amongst the country where it's almost like 50-50. And it's, you typically don't see elections like that. People will win by much higher majorities. I mean, that has led to like a lot of these questions about, the elections and fraud. But that is like, it's, I don't know what the astrology would point to really show that, but it is just this real like division right down the line where it's like there is no, it's really hard to say which side has more support. And I don't think we typically see that in America.
Well, and what I can say is when I personally see Pluto opposite Mercury in a birth chart, what seems to happen is those people, the handful that I know, are very much aware of conspiracies, like whatever, corruption, things like that. And so I would say the other possibility of how that energy would play out is that person would be corrupt. So in this case, we see in America's birth chart, I would say I don't study the charts of nations the way I do people, but one of the intuitively what feels accurate is in America, we certainly see this dynamic, and I don't know how much this is present in other places in the world, of like the news being like all this terrible stuff, and people really eat it up.
Well, and also, again, now in this time in history, it's like, what's the real news and what's, that idea of Mercury.
So that's the other piece is deception. You know what I mean? Like,
are
what
we
the
getting
hell's
real
going on?
And
and so the other piece that I think is also perhaps part of that pattern is you have Neptune square to Mars. So if you think about Mars being anger and Neptune creating confusion, and these two, Neptune would also then be sextile. So it's kind of perhaps also influencing Mercury. I mean, as far as I understand, corruption exists in most nations. right?
Yeah, no, I don't think America has the
And
holds the
I mean, and in general, I would say, as much as we complain about all the bad stuff, we got it pretty good in America compared to other places in the world and compared to how things were in the past. I mean, just even 100, 200 years ago, certainly like 1,000 years ago, the world was a much darker place, and corruption was much more like the corrupt superpowers of the ruling elite had much more control over the masses, right? So as much unpleasantness as there is in the world, it does seem we're moving in the right direction, and it does seem that in America things are better than they are in other places, and they were in the past. That said, my analysis of America's birth chart is you look at this Mercury opposite Pluto, both retrograde. It seems that is kind of part of this dynamic, this fascination with not only like negative, terrible stuff, but also division and conflict. You know, this, and then you also add the Mars squared Neptune, kind of building this theme of you have this like intensity, this conflict, this awareness of corruption and bad stuff, and you know, my side versus your side. And then you bring in this element of confusion and, you know, like, what the hell what's even really going on? How do you know? And you don't, like, you can't. So.
Yeah. And I think there always has, I mean, one thing that has always frustrated me, as an American citizen is that there is so much hidden information. Like, even, you know, they still won't disclose like the JFK documents. And it's kind of like, why? I mean, everyone involved is passed away now. I mean,
Yeah.
why can't this information just be out there? But there is a lot of, you know, that is one thing that exists really very much in America, is that there's a lot of, you know, what's considered like, you know, national security and secrets and things kept hidden. And I think America does. That's something that America keeps very sacred, is these national security secrets and keeping things under wraps.
Yeah, and the other piece I would add to that is then what's, you know, so-called whistleblowers or whatever come forward and present information, and it's like, even for somebody like me, like, I look at this and it's like, I mean, this may be true, or it may just be somebody like making some stuff up. You know what I mean? Like, now you have all these people who claim to have been part of the military coming forward talking about these secret space programs and UFOs, and, you know, and America kind of reverse engineering alien technology and things like that. And, you know, there's this whole group of people who've been predicting of like this big disclosure event, you know, is coming next year, like since the 90s, right?
That's my point. There never is a big disclosure event.
Yeah, and but the thing is, like, there actually was a big, I'm forgetting the guy's name, Stephen Greer, and I'm not super into this stuff, but I'm aware of it. He was on C-SPAN with a panel of people saying, we've been working with ETs for decades. And it wasn't like it was on C-SPAN, you know what I mean? In like a government press conference. And it was just kind of brushed under the rug. It was like hardly anybody even saw it. And now you have this like kind of growing thing, which I don't watch TV, but it's, you know, there's stuff on Netflix as well as like, you know, like cable and even, I don't know exactly what channels it's being played on, but saying like, you know, there's UFOs is real, and we're actually interacting with ETs, but then different faction, you know, different groups of people are saying, you know, different things. So it's like the stories don't all add up. And so I don't know what to believe with all of this stuff. I mean, God, that'd be pretty cool if aliens, you know, assuming they're nice and they want to help us, showed up and, you know, maybe gave us a little advice about not being, you know, so stupid about certain things. And, you know, like I'm cheering for that. I would love to see that happen, but I'm not going to give it any energy because I don't know. I don't know who to believe. And I think that's where I'm going with this, is like, who do you believe? Like, corruption is so rampant, and the media it's like so easy to make up fake news and to make up fake anything. And now it's like we're so inundated with information. I mean, you could spend every waking hour for the rest of your life listening to different things on YouTube and whatever else, and not even get through a small fraction of it, of just all the information that's out there. And so that also seems like that's part of America's Pluto return, is this kind of amplification of that dynamic. And it's like it's going freaking crazy, and I don't know what to do with it other than to just kind of like distance myself from it. Part of what I want to do here is not to tell you this is what's going to happen and this is exactly what this means. Is just to look at this is what happened in the past, and here's how these different things are, what's coming in the future. So when we can expect some more significant events, and for individuals, how to work with that energy, how to navigate it. So
I think the reason we're using America's birth chart too is that, if you are living in America, you're experiencing these energies. So it's a good way to learn astrology, because if you can think back to what all of this felt like in 2016, you can start to understand the transits.
Okay, so in addition to this, if you can just try and remember where things are, and what I want to point out is of particular importance is you have Mars here at 21 degrees of Gemini, and then also the ascendant and descendant kind of in the middle of Gemini and Sagittarius. Here,
we know that Donald Trump has a Gemini sun.
Does. And so here's Donald Trump's chart. And so what I want to show you that's of particular relevance here, a few things. So here's Donald Trump's sun. It's at, 23 degrees of Gemini, also conjunct the North Node and Uranus. So Uranus at 18 degrees, the North Node at 21 degrees of Gemini. He was born right at a lunar eclipse, like a few hours before the moon was eclipsed. And so that would have been at 23 degrees. His moon is, I think, at 21. Interesting, 2112. America's ascendant is at 1221. I like numbers. So then his moon is 10 degrees from America's ascendant. So this lines up exactly with America's Mars and widely with America's Uranus and ascendant. I think that's pretty relevant. He's also got his Mercury at 9 degrees, kind of right in between America's Sun and Jupiter, and then his Saturn and Venus are conjunct at the end of Cancer, which would then so his Saturn is exactly conjunct America's Mercury, but also then widely conjunct America's Sun. His Pluto is around America's North Node, and then his Neptune and Jupiter is around America's Saturn, also square to America's Sun, as well as America's Jupiter, and then Venus, I think. Yeah, I think that's kind of something I wanted to point out to our viewers, is that looking at synastry and relationship charts, something I've become interested in is how do these prominent figures in America, as well as perhaps individuals, like myself and Sarah, who are not like running for president and not going to be like nationally known. I mean, who knows? Maybe we will be someday. We're not yet. To see how these people line up with America's charts, I think it's really fascinating to see this exact conjunction with Donald Trump's Sun, Uranus, and North Node with America's Mars. And, if you think about the energy of Mars in America, he is certainly stimulating America's anger and their desire to fight.
So he has Mars right on his ascendant, basically. And so then it's in opposition to America's Mars on its descendant, right?
So Donald Trump's Mars is conjunct his ascendant.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly opposite America's moon. So that's the other thing that lines up with Trump. Okay. So America's moon is over here, I think 27 degrees of Aquarius, and his Mars is at 27 degrees of Leo. So that's also an exact aspect. So then his DC also conjuncts America's moon. So there's another connection. Yeah, pretty much Donald Trump's entire chart lines up with America, and just doing like kind of a quick overview. I mean, the energies that are kind of stimulated by Donald Trump is a pretty clean fit.